Hello friends, my name's Emile and welcome back to some more Forza Top Gear laps. Today I figured we'd take another look at some more DLC cars. These DLC cars come courtesy of both the March DLC pack and the recently released April Top Gear pack. Let's get into it with our first vehicle today, which is the Audi R8 V10 Plus 2016 model. 610 horsepower, 3,428 pounds of weight. Now, we've had the previous generation of R8s around here before, and it did reasonably well. In all fairness, it was one of the first cars to go around. It's at a time of a 1:17.2, so it was a bit quicker than a Nissan GT-R and a Lexus LFA, but it never could quite compete with some of its modern supercar peers. The 2016 model already looks a lot better on paper. 610 horsepower is quite a bit more than the previous model, and it also weighs about 200 pounds less than the previous model. Statistically, it is very similar to the Lamborghini Huracan, and to drive is very similar to the Lamborghini Huracan. It's pretty damn good, save for some understeer which can be generated by the four-wheel drive system, both through hammerhead and coming out of the tyres. That's where the understeer will bite back, but other than that, the car is pretty perfect. It has a decent amount of power, which means it has great top speed. Admittedly, it's not quite as quick as maybe the McLaren 650S, but it's still pretty damn quick in a straight line through the corners. It's great, and it gets off the line very well thanks to a four-wheel drive system. Overall, I was very much impressed with the Audi R8, and I think it's an improvement over the old one. Next up, we've got the Jaguar F-Type Project 7, 567 horsepower, 3,571 pounds of weight. Now, we've had the previous F-Type R go around here before, and I was kind of curious to see how the Project 7 would do. Now, admittedly, on paper, the Project 7 has a little bit more power than the F-Type. I believe it may weigh slightly more than the stock vehicle, although I can't be too sure of that. I haven't actually looked at the statistics on the stock F-Type. PI-wise, this vehicle is a 2 PI more than the F-Type R, so I'm very interested to see how the car competes. Overall, to drive, well, it drives like an F-Type, which essentially means it drives like a slightly classier muscle car. This one feels like it's a little bit more composed than I remember the F-Type being. Admittedly, this car still feels like it's very much built for just having fun and sliding around corners. However, it does feel a little bit more serious than the F-Type R did. It's a pretty decent vehicle overall. Straight line speed is pretty good. 567 horsepower is an awful lot, and on any other day that would be considered quite a lot. However, it's relatively average for the vehicles we have here today. Yeah, I was impressed with the F-Type Project 7. I love F-Types, and I do like this vehicle. Save for that strange hump it's got on its back, I don't like that at all. Moving on now to our most powerful car of the day. This is the Dodge Charger Hellcat, 707 horsepower. I got that wrong in the DLC video. 4,575 pounds of weight. Now, we've had the Challenger Hellcat go around before, and I was interested to see how the Charger Hellcat would perform. In short, this vehicle is horrible to drive. It really is. Just through the corners, it's awful. It feels like it's got an open differential. It just wants to slide everywhere. The Challenger, I don't really remember much of driving the Challenger. I haven't drove the Challenger for quite a while, but the Challenger, at least from what I remember, was a lot better to drive. This vehicle, however, isn't just strange in the sense of its handling, it's also strange in the way it picks up speed. You see, I've driven cars faster than this. Obviously, I've driven a Koenigsegg 1.1, that's about the fastest accelerating thing known to man. However, the Charger Hellcat appears to almost teleport. If it's sliding a little bit and you just mash the throttle, provided you can keep it all controlled, the Charger almost seems to jump. It's that quick. 707 horsepower is an awful lot. That's more than all of the modern supercars. It's absolutely incredible that they could put down this much power in a four-door sedan, and while it doesn't do it particularly well, I still have to commend it for being still somewhat controllable. Next up, we've got the Rolls-Royce Dawn, 563 horsepower, 564 pounds of weight. Now, the Rolls-Royce Dawn, a car I wasn't particularly huge on when it was first shown in the car pack, but nonetheless, this had to go around at some point. We've had the Wraith round before, and the Wraith is indeed a little bit more powerful than the Dawn. It's got about 50 more horsepower. However, the Dawn weighs a little bit less than that vehicle. Overall, the Dawn is actually nicer to drive than the Wraith is. The Wraith felt very much like an SUV, and while this still does feel a little bit like one of those, it feels more like the BMW X5M than the Wraith did, which the Wraith felt more like a G65. It was wobbling about everywhere and you just couldn't get any grip from it. The Rolls-Royce kind of has that a bit, but it does remind me more of the X5M, which was a fantastic handling vehicle, especially for what it was. You can indeed feel the weight in this vehicle. It is, of course, the heaviest vehicle here today by quite a long shot. But it wasn't terrible to drive, and that's sort of what you'd expect a Rolls-Royce to be. Straight line speed is decent enough. I wish this thing would actually have a rev counter in the interior. It's really hard to judge like how to change gears in this thing, because it's got some stupid power meter or whatever inside it. But nevertheless, the Rolls-Royce Dawn was a pretty decent handling vehicle. Moving on now to the Jaguar XJ-S, 299 horsepower, 3,968 pounds of weight. This is by far the most disappointing car of the day. The XJ-S is a car I kind of like. I don't mind the XJ-S. I prefer the E-Type, to be honest with you, but it still isn't bad. However, this vehicle is pretty damn atrocious to drive. Let's kick it off with the suspension. As you can see, it is very, very wallowy. Bear in mind, this is a 1990 car. And I've driven cars from the 70s that have less suspension travel than this. It's pretty awful when it comes to its suspension. Now, as a result of that, the vehicle also wants to slide out a bit. Admittedly, it's not that bad. There is colossal understeer. If you take even a little bit too much speed into a corner, this thing will just power straight on. The next thing about this car is its gearbox. You see, I was in first gear for most of this. This vehicle has a 3-speed gearbox. Again, this car was made in 1990. It has a 3-speed gearbox. Bear in mind, most American muscle cars have 4 speeds. This, it just does not feel sophisticated at all. It feels like a muscle car. It feels like something that should have been built in 1960. In fact, I'd hazard a guess that the E-Type would be better to drive around here. Unfortunately, the E-Type hasn't been around here just yet. But I would hazard a guess that the E-Type is better to drive than the XJ-S. Bit of a disappointing car overall. The only thing this really had going for it is the straight line speed was okay. And finally today we have the Mercedes-Benz 280 SL, 180 horsepower, 3,120 pounds of weight. This is both the lightest vehicle here today and the least powerful by quite a ways away. Anyways, the 280 SL, this drives better than that XJ-S does. In fact, to be honest with you, these vehicles could switch characteristics and I'd be none otherwise, because this vehicle just has nowhere near the suspension travel the XJ-S has. However, getting off the XJ-S, what does the 280 SL actually drive like? Well, it's actually really, really good. The suspension is a bit wallowy. It can understeer occasionally. I think that's more due to the softer suspension than the actual car itself. However, it's pretty decent to drive. It's fun as well. This actually kind of reminds me of the 94 Miata. This is very much like a 60s version of a Mazda Miata, just with a little bit more power. As a result, this, I'm not sure if it's actually much quicker at all than the Mazda MX-5 was. Admittedly, it doesn't really have the aerodynamics, and it's actually quite a tall riding car, you'll notice. However, the 280 SL was pretty spot on to drive. I enjoyed my time driving this vehicle, and I never thought I'd do that because I'm not a huge fan of the 280 SL. However, after driving it, I do have to admit it is pretty nice to drive. I also really like the dashboard in this car, just saying, because it's all colour coded and stuff, kind of like a old Fiat 500 or a Beetle. I don't like the Beetle, but I like the colour dashboard nonetheless. Anyway, 280 SL is almost across the line. There it goes. Anyways, onto the times, and the Audi R8 V10 Plus goes into 28th with a 114.854, which is pretty good. Beats out Carrera GT, a little bit slower than a Lamborghini Aventador, and as you can see, it is slower than 3 of the mainstream supercars of today, but that still isn't a bad time. Moving on, the F-Type Project 7 goes into 66 with a 119.050. Beats out California T, a Mercedes McLaren SLR. Beats out the original F-Type by 0.4 of a second. That is a quick car. I'm kind of impressed with that. The Charger Hellcat goes into 94th with a 121.387. Beats out the Challenger Hellcat marginally, although the Challenger Hellcat went around here ages ago. It almost beats the BMW M5, which is pretty impressive to say that car was such a handful to drive. The Rolls-Royce Dawn goes into 129th with a 125.191. It is slower than the Wraith, however, the Dawn still did really well. Beats out on Mazda RX-7, the aforementioned X5M, R33 Skyline, most of the STIs. Very quick car, that, apparently. The Jaguar XJ-S goes into 177th with a 131.445, in between a Holden Monaro and a Chevrolet El Camino. It's with the muscle cars, which is sort of where it belongs. It beats a Sunbeam Tiger, surprisingly enough. And finally, the Mercedes-Benz 280 SL, it may have drove very nice, but it was quite slow. A 135.756 means it is slower than a Mazda Miata and a Jaguar XK120, but it is still quite a good car to drive. Beats our Vauxhall Astra as well, so that's always a good thing. Anyways, friends, that is it for today's episode of the Forza Top Gear Laps. I will get back on track with the single cars. I just wanted to put this episode out today in case anyone was curious about the vehicles. Oh, and the Land Rover Range Rover SVR, I'll be reviewing that on Sunday, so that's why that hasn't gone around today. Anyways, friends, I want to thank you all very much for watching. As always, leave suggestions for themes and cars you'd like to see in the comments below. And as always, thank you all very much for watching. My name's been the Real Emile, and until next time, farewell.